listening to Reckless Creatives, a Pipeline Artists original podcast, where Sadie Dean and Jeannie Villette-Bowerman share the candid truth about the challenges and benefits of living life as artists. So, Marty Lang, here you are, finally on Reckless Creatives.
After all this time, it was fated.
So, Marty, you have been in the indie film space for like 10,000 years. And now you have a new book out, The Self-Sustaining Filmmaker.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if there is such a thing as self-sustaining. We all just need somebody to lift us up. First of all, give us a little background before we get into the book. I mean, I know you've made your own films, you've been a professor, like you've done so much already and have also been unbelievably supportive of all these indie filmmakers and their Kickstarter and Seed and Spark and Indiegogo, like every platform out there. Tell us a little bit about why are you a masochist to be in this space?
You cut right to it.
Right. For so long.
That bandage off.
Yeah, rip it off.
I talk a little bit about this in the book. When I worked on my first indie film, it was this romantic comedy that was shooting in rural Connecticut. It starred Soupy Sales, right? So that tells you how long ago this was. And it was basically like going to a month of film camp. And I had the absolute time of my life. It was just every day was just amazing. I had worked as the boom operator. I was part of the sound team. It was the first time I had ever been on set. Like everything was just so new and so exciting. And, you know, we had one day, the director used to work for a news channel in Connecticut. And at the time, one of their anchors was actually Gayle King. So I got to work with Gayle King for a day. And the lead female in the story was Mia Tyler, who's Liv Tyler's sister. She's a plus size model, Steven Tyler's daughter. Like, so there was this like level of celebrity on a micro budget little film that was shooting in the middle of nowhere. And when we were done, I was like, I want to do this for the rest of my life. I quickly learned that one cannot do that for the rest of their lives and still expect, a full retirement. So, then became the second part of the journey is how do you figure out, how to sustain yourself while you're working on projects like that or trying to find projects like that. So that's kind of where it all started, kind of built from there.
And we talk to people all the time about how are you going to make money? How are you going to retire? Were we just talking about this? Oh, I don't know. Maybe
it's a pipe dream we have, retirement.
What's that? I'm unfamiliar with this because a lot of people aren't thinking God bless them, when they're young and excited and just want to create. What does retirement look for me? What's a 401k? Like, what's this? I love that though. I think there's something about that's kind of necessary to pause that practicality, or else nobody would ever create because they'd be thinking, I got to fill up my bank account.
That's true. I mean, the first feature film I directed was called Rising Star in Connecticut. The only reason I had time to shoot it was because I got laid off.
Yeah.
Like that's and the story of the film was about a guy who was facing a layoff. So I felt like if I couldn't do it then, when could I ever do it? When you first start out, pardon the pun, that recklessness is something that is important because it gets you over the hump of you don't know what you're doing. But over time, I don't think I'm not as daring as I used to be when it comes to the physical production of stuff, right? But it's because I've done it for a while and now I'm smarter and, I can make a shorter day. But the difference is I want to make a shorter day now because I have a wife and a 1-year-old son to go home to. So I'm in a different part of my life now. And, you can still create and you can still be successful. I think it just takes, a little bit of looking at it a little differently so that you can accommodate whatever phase of life you're in,
And I think that's what's so interesting and different about people who aspire to create films as opposed to write a novel. Like you write a novel, it's a different, even if you self-publish, the whole price point, everything is like the bars, it's an easier reach than filmmaking. Filmmaking, I mean, self-publishing, you can do it all by yourself. Filmmaking, you need a crew, you need a cast, you need all the things to align, you need money, you need to make the film, not just you need money to eat.
Yeah.
And if you do not feed your crew well,
they will remember.
I can write a whole book about that. Yeah, totally.
yeah.
Before we started hitting record, I was telling Marty how I love this book, and I wish I had this 20 years ago in my back pocket starting out as a filmmaker. And it's so digestible that like anyone can come at this and be like, yes, I could take away from it, whether you're just beginning or you're in the middle of your career, or if you're successful and whatever that means for you. But there's just so many great little bites out of this. And one of the big thing that really stood out to me was your definition, or your coin phrase of like the indie gap. And I'm like, this is just like no brainer because nobody really talks about it. And having gone through film school and conservatory film school, and they just don't talk about that stuff. They're just like, you've made art, now go out there and maybe you'll make money. Good luck. And here's your bill. You're like, cool. All right, great.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Go change the world and here's your student loans.
Right.
Um, that was something that kind of came into my head after I went to film school. I went to Florida State University and I was there from 2002 to 2004. And when I was there, I was in the graduate program, and one of the undergrad students was a kid from Miami, who really wanted to make movies, and he made this really beautiful short film about an Indian couple who own a laundromat and how they wash American flags for free, and it was just this beautiful story. It was so like European, it just felt great. And he made a micro budget feature when he got out, and it took off. It played festivals all over the world, got him an agent. And then, he started doing other things. He directed commercials, he wrote TV. And it wasn't until 9 years later that he got a chance to actually get hired to make a film. That film became Moonlight. When I saw his journey and I see, where he is now, he's got the sequel to The Lion King coming out. That sort of before chapter is something I've never seen analyzed.
Mhm.
It's always about, it's how to get that first break. Right. And of course you need that, but how do you get to when you get your first break? And that really felt to me like something that could be not academically studied, but like, kind of looked at a little bit more. And so that people know, you're not necessarily out of the game if you don't have $1 million sitting in a checking account somewhere,
Mhm.
and that's the unfortunate truth of it. Like a lot of people are able to make their first film because they either come from means or they know folks that come from means. I am neither of those things. It's important to me, to let people know that there's a way to do it. It's a little bit different than the quote unquote traditional way to do it, but it can be every bit as successful. Again, like you said, however you define that term.
Is this the kind of stuff like you wanted to cover that, like, gee, I wish this was something someone taught us in film school?
Sort of. It's interesting when this is also letting people know how old I am. When I went to film school, crowdfunding didn't exist. It was about 6 years after I got out that Kickstarter sort of became ubiquitous, and people started really, seeing crowdfunding as a viable method to raise money for any kind of creative project. So when I got out, I was taught the method that worked up until that point. I was happy I was taught that method, and I went out and I made my first feature according to that method, and I fell flat on my face. So, when the film came out, there was no way for me to make money because I hadn't built an audience, or as big of an audience as I should have beforehand. I didn't have a distribution plan figured out, all that kind of stuff. So as the 2010s went on, that's when I started putting the list together of things like, well, okay, it would have been great if these things existed when I was in film school, because then I could have learned about them. But now that they exist, maybe I can teach about them, since I have a little bit of experience with it. So
You do touch on it in your book too, which I appreciate, just in terms of, having had film professors who are very in their ways of this is how you do it and this is how you have to do it. And there's no practicality around it, or they're just so old school, they don't know the new tools. And I think that is, you being a professor and you are very hands-on, and bringing that to the students is really beneficial for them. So that hopefully they don't fall on their face when they leave your clutches. But another thing that really stood out to me as a producer, and you kind of cover it in that first chapter, of just about how, the money kind of flows, and when it eventually comes back, if you get any, the producer is usually the last one to get paid, but you kind of mark it out pretty clearly. Like, if you want to get paid, you should be responsible for your distribution plan, and that's how you get your money. And I was like, yeah, again, no brainer. Just like, coming to that conclusion for yourself and having, been through all of it yourself. How did you get to that?
Well, I've had experiences on both sides of that. I've been involved in indies that have gotten deals where, that were actually pretty successful, where the film would go out and play in theaters and it would make a little bit of money. Again, nothing you can retire on, but, when you get into this level, you kind of understand that. But there were more of them where, you go through the process, you make something, you're proud of it, and then it's like, oh, okay, now what? And a lot of folks can relate to that. But the next step is to say to those people, the entire way you've been taught to make films is missing something. And that's because the way films have worked for 100 years is that distributors take on the role of getting it out into the world and marketing it and all that kind of thing. So because of tools like crowdfunding and sites like Patreon and, stuff like that, and self-distribution, you think of like old places like Tug and Gather and Bitmax and stuff like that, you can take the entire life cycle of the film and you can now control it. And that's something that's new. So that's the opportunity from an educator standpoint, is to let people know you don't have to go out and try to get a distribution deal, depending on what the goals of your film are, right? So like the film I talk about in the book, Stay With Me, the feature that I wrote and directed, we have a traditional distribution deal for that. But the reason that we do is because, one, the whole film cost $27,000 to make, beginning to end, with festival fees, with distribution deliverables, with everything. It
Wow.
cost $27,000, and we crowdfunded half of it. That plan for that film is to just get it out as wide as we possibly can. So, and we knew that from the very beginning. And I had connections having worked with distributors in the past, and that's ultimately how we got the deal that we got. Again, we're not going to retire on it, but we get into it knowing that, our goal is to let people see our work. So it'll be on cable, it'll be on streaming, it'll be on digital, it'll be in the Caribbean, it'll be in Canada and stuff like that. So that was exciting. I'm a mile away from your original question. It's really about figuring out kind of what the goals are for your film, and then sort of building to that. But again, like the films that I've worked on, some have been successful, some have been, again, fallen flat on their face. I've kind of seen every possible, outcome.
Yeah. And what's so cool about this day and age too is that, just like you have, you can a film studio in your pocket with your phone, with distribution, you have so many creative outlets through, digital platforms, or, going to your local theater and putting it up yourself, or whatever it is. I think that's there's a lot more power in our hands as independents, which is really cool and really frightening all at the same time.
Yeah.
Nothing about that frightens me. I think it's the most exciting thing. And the nicest thing too is we're able to kind of develop the rules as we go.
Right.
Right. So because we're taking the entire life cycle into our hands, we can make the choices of how we want to treat our cast and crew. We can make the choices in how we interact with our community and things like that. Like, so this is something that's not in the book. The film that I hope to make next, now once the book gets out and, hopefully some folks, get help by it, I have a film that I want to make that's been sort of inspired by the birth of my son. And it's about the potential that every person has, and the question of, what do you need to reach your full potential, and what are the things that can block you from doing that? So I've got a sort of like a comedy drama film that explores that question. I'm already talking with folks in Athens, Georgia, where the University of Georgia is, where I teach, and we're trying to sort of build a community of people around that idea right now. It might not be 2 or 3 years until we actually make the film, but I'm already kind of seeding the idea to it to different people. Like I had a meeting with the city's film commissioner, and I was like, hey, are there any jobs that you think we need to get more people trained for the bigger films that come into the city? And can you give me a grant so that we can hire people to do those jobs on a tiny movie so they can be qualified? Right. So that is sort of like finding places where we can collaborate and build an infrastructure that would support a film that you wouldn't necessarily have to pay full price for everything for. Right. So like there's a massage therapy school about 20 minutes away from the university. And I'm going to go to them and say, listen, I know all your students need hours to get certified. We're going to be making a film soon. If you had people on set giving massages, you would be the most
Yes.
ever. So like those kinds of things are the things that I'm slowly starting to put out there. And that's the way I want to deal with the community and the way I want to involve them and hopefully get them excited, and have them on board and have them want to be part of the team when we actually make the film.
Yeah.
You know what else would be great is if they gave massages to your podcast hosts. Because we could use some.
Yeah. I will come out to Athens to help and
get a massage.
Yeah, absolutely. All I think of is just all like your whole camera department would just be so thankful for that. Steadicam operator, first in line. Yeah.
Yeah. 100%.
We'd almost need to hire an extra camera person so that they can cycle out over the course of the day, right? That'd be cool.
That now what phase? Like keeping people motivated to keep going. I mean, you and I first met on Twitter probably in 2009, maybe 2000. Yeah, somewhere around there. There's a lot of people who we knew at the time in the film industry or just writing who are no longer. They're long gone. But how do you think, like, what do you think the key is, that trick is to not giving up and staying in? Because sometimes, even myself, I feel like if I had just maybe pushed a little harder on that project, or maybe if I hadn't just kind of thought, God, I can't take this one anymore, I'm going to start something new. Like maybe I missed my opportunity because I dialed back a little bit. Like, what do you think is like the biggest mistake people make, or a solution to how to stay in the game for them get pushed through the now what?
I think the people who are long-term in this, I think, are very stubborn. I think that's a personality trait that we all share to some degree. If you're really a storyteller, and this can be in film, this can be in prose, it can be whatever. If you really have stories that you're burning to tell, I think you're going to figure out a way to do it. The way that I did it, I first started off before I got into filmmaking. I was a journalist, and I used to write for the New York Times. I wrote for a bunch of magazines around the country when I got out of college. And I had then the goal and the dream was to make a living as a storyteller. And I was doing it sort of, like I was able to pay my rent at least. But I kind of saw, like, with this new thing, the internet coming, that maybe video might be the better way to go. And I pivoted, went to film school, learned how to make films, got out, started working in indie, and then kind of went from there. Saw that working in indie wasn't exactly going to be the way to retire. So then I thought, well, I have an MFA, maybe I can teach. Right. So then I start doing that for a little bit. And what ends up happening, for me anyway, is you find opportunities that kind of overlap on each other. So like whenever I teach a class, I have 25 years worth of independent film experience that I can bring into the classroom with me. Right. So I don't have to worry about coming up with materials for any class anymore, because they're all sitting in my closet, like from all the films that I worked on. So if I'm teaching location management, I can literally pull out my binder from the film Goats that I was the location manager for, that David Duchovny starred in. And I can go in and I can show you guys, like, look, this is the paperwork, so that, I think finding ways where your creative work can overlap with another element of your life, I think, is really important. And then for me personally, I didn't get married until I was 45. So that gave me a little bit more time. I didn't start my family when I was 46. So, that gave me some time to kind of work on stuff a little bit more than if I had a family. And that was a conscious choice. I wanted to see if I could make it work. And, from the point of view of, am I making a living purely as a creative? I'm not. I work in education, but I'm
Mhm.
80% there, right? So when I
Yeah.
go to work, I work on a 14,000 square foot soundstage. There's things shooting every day I go to work, and they're
Mhm.
all narrative projects, right? So I've got that energy that I can hopefully soak up and, use to create my own things, when I'm not changing diapers or whatever it is.
And Sadie and I say that all the time about what we do. I mean, when I was at Script for all those years, now Sadie's at Script, and now I'm at Pipeline. I mean, yes, I mean, does it limit the amount of creativity time we have? It does, but it also allows us to still network and be in that space and talk about things we love all
Mhm.
the time and meet amazing people and
And
sit
also,
here with Marty Lang on our
Right.
podcast.
he's just some dude. The other cool thing too about that is the opportunity to mentor,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And that's
Hmm.
something I never realized how fulfilling that was until I actually started teaching. And I started doing production classes and I actually helped walk students through. I mean, that's really what got me going after I saw that, the first couple student films that I oversaw. So that's a great thing, that can be part of a career as well.
Yeah. And then you never know, 5 years from now, that student will be putting up their own picture and they're going to call you up because you're awesome to them and they're going to, hire you. It's the
That's
way it
already
works, right?
that's already happened to me twice.
That's awesome.
Cool.
And actually, one of those films is a feature film that I produced, that my former student directed, that both I and my wife acted in.
Hmm.
Uh, and it came out about a month ago at the biggest transgender film festival in the country in Seattle, and it won Best Feature.
What's the
Oh,
name of
wow.
Yep. It's called I Do This for a Living. Yep. And the director is a young man named Noah Woods, and brilliant filmmaker. He's just so good. And he had his whole family play themselves in the film.
Oh,
So
wow.
it was like a version of family therapy when they went through this story. It was based on his family. Yeah, it was a really cool experience.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That sounds very intense. Like, did you have a therapist on set?
We should have. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it
Well,
was some intense subject matter, but yeah, so it's a beautiful film.
wow. That's wonderful.
So also you touch in your book. I don't want to give away all of the book, but there's some really good nuggets in there. Crowdfunding, which is like the scary word for a lot of folks who are just starting out or have done it and don't know how to get back to it. Just in terms of going back to that same well, essentially, like how many times can you do that? Or like what have you found that works to like re-engage your community and growing that community and then, going back to that well again for the next film that you want to do?
I think part of that process is understanding that you're not going to get 100% of them every time.
Hmm.
And that's a hard lesson that I had to learn because, my first film, everyone sort of came out of the woodwork and my friends from high school, were supporting, and a buddy of mine who won Powerball gave me $2,000 and stuff like that. But for the second one, a lot of them were nowhere to be found. And
Mhm.
it took 9 years to get that second film going. So a lot of them now have families. Some of them have mortgages, and a lot of people are in different situations than they were from the first time. And that's okay. It's
Mhm.
really just sort of understanding that the audience that you have should only be a small percentage of what the ultimate audience is for each project. Right. So if, say, for example, you're able to get 100 followers in a crowdfunding campaign or 100 backers, I would say 30 to 40 of them should be people that you already know or that are part of your already built audience over time. And those other 60 to 70 should be people that have some sort of connection to the project that you're making. And that's a flip that a lot of filmmakers get nervous by when they hear, because that means hard work to go
Mhm.
out and actually find those people. And the book talks about how you can go out and find them. And I kind of broke down, the audience that I had for Rising Star for my first film. But it really is the work of getting people on board one at a time.
But I love that you also go into the entrepreneur mindset because there's so many artists who just want to be in a hole and create, like especially writers, they just want to be in this hole and create. Whether you're a writer or a filmmaker, you still have to, you are a business and you still have to think like an entrepreneur. Did it take you a long time to figure out, oh, this is a business? Like, along the way, like when you look back in time, do you wish maybe you thought about that earlier, or did you kind of already know it along the way?
I knew it was a business all along, but I didn't know how much of the process I could manage.
Mm-hmm.
Is the right question or the right answer. When I made Rising Star, I made the film fully expecting that I would find a distribution deal for it, that the film would then go out into the world and it would make money. That didn't happen. So once that was done, and I kind of licked my wounds and got back to, making short films and stuff, actually started my own business. And two friends of mine from Quinnipiac University, where I used to teach, we created a production company and social media management company. We did crowdfunding consulting and stuff like that. And it was at that point where I saw, oh, wait a minute, we're overseeing the entire life cycle now. We're not outsourcing any piece of this process to anybody else because they're taking their cut, right?
Mm-hmm.
We need that cut because that's what's going to pay my health insurance this month.
Mm-hmm.
So that was where I saw, okay, well, wait a minute. Can we apply this to film? Can we figure out a way where everybody, is overseeing the entire process? And at first I thought, well, that means I have to become a movie studio. But it's not necessarily that. That's not the answer necessarily. Like you can boil it down to a single filmmaker, filmmaking enterprise, and you can oversee the entire life cycle of it. And the great thing about it is that once you do it once, every contact you made is still there for every other film you'll ever make. And that's something that was another sort of evolution in the way that I was thinking. If I make a film now, I want to make sure that I'm treating everybody good and that, we're doing deals that everybody is happy with. And, we're making a story that's high quality and made efficiently, because we could call on those folks again if we make another film in the future.
Mm-hmm.
So it kind of came in stages, I think.
Speaking of calling on people in the future, you are a very good networker.
Oh, thank you.
And that's a special little skill. And a lot of times people will meet somebody like at a conference or an event or a film festival, whatever. And then they kind of like 10 years go by and they've never sent them that email,
Right.
that follow-up email. Do you have tips for people on growing your network?
Understand that it will take time. I think that's an important one. If you saw the forward of the book was written by the actor producer Mark Duplass. I met him at Sundance in 2010, and about a year later was the story that the forward talks about, the film in Maine, where I went out there and and kind of like hung out on set and worked on this film that his friend and my friend was making. He didn't remember me from Sundance when I got out there. That was okay. I had another moment where I went in and I reintroduced myself and, oh, okay. And then after that, I just stayed in touch every couple of months, send an email. Hey, how you doing? I heard you got this TV show, greenlit from HBO. Congratulations. Do you need any help? Stuff like that. And then you never know where it's going to go. Like when I moved out to Los Angeles, I got out there in 2015. I went to an event where they were showing the first couple episodes of a show that they produced called Animals. It was an animated show on HBO. And when he saw me there, I got a bear hug. His wife came over and gave me a hug. Welcome to our fair city, he said, and within 6 months, I was acting on his new TV show. I was working for his short form production company, and I was working on commercials with them, and I was producing a web series with them that ended up going to Sundance, and all of these different things. It took time, and it was just being available and trying to be helpful and being a kind person. And if you do those things over time, you'll see benefits from it.
I'd also like to point out that everyone notice that Marty said, "Is there anything I can do to help you?"
Right. Yep.
But it wasn't about me, me, me. It was paying it forward.
Yep.
That's a huge thing.
It's the most important thing, because folks, they can clock if you're there to try to get something quick. But I think, it's a much more successful relationship and a much more meaningful one if you take the time to get to know someone and you actually try to help them. I'll give you a perfect example. I have a friend named Josh Brandon. I met him during the writer's strike, and he was at the time, he was just getting into directing. He was directing a short film. And I met him on Twitter, and when I was living in LA, and I said, "Hey, listen, I've got producing experience. I've done production management. If you need any help on your short, I'd love to help you. Would love to meet you and just kind of hang out and see what's going on." So he hired me to work as his location manager. And it was a 2-day gig, right? So real quick, it was a 1-day shoot, 1-day prep. And I met all the actors that were in the film, were all actors from the TV shows that he wrote for. He was on a show called Haven. He was a writer for that. It was on Sci-Fi. And some of his actors from there were in the short. Got to meet all them, got to hang out, had a great time. Fast forward 2 or 3 years, now he's producing and directing feature films in Oklahoma because he's made a deal with a financier, and now he's making $300,000 films, 2, 3, 4 of them a year in Oklahoma. So now he's asking me, if you can write a thriller with a female lead, we can see about actually getting it made. So that's the kind of thing, if you take the time to help someone, over time it comes back to you. And you don't know how, but it's basically like the process of just putting good energy out into the world.
Here's something else. They come to you and they say, "Hey, if you could write this," well, then you have to write it, because there's times when that comes back for people. They get these opportunities, and then there's sometimes, this is a whole other, maybe we do need a therapist for this episode. There's a whole other thing where people are like almost like afraid of success. Like they get that big break and they stumble, they hiccup, they panic, I don't have time for that. That's the other trick. We talk about the now what and how to stay in the game. Opportunities sometimes are going to come to you when you don't have the time, but if you really, really, really want it, make the time, figure out how to push other stuff aside to write that script that hopefully they like.
Right. And that's the kind of thing where you don't know. It's just creating that relationship has given you the opportunity. And now if you come up with something, hopefully it'll work. Now, the nice thing with the Josh situation is I had never written a thriller. He gave me that offer. So then, I started thinking, well, maybe I could write a thriller. Like what could one look like? And so I just started thinking about it. And I still haven't sent him anything, but I let him know, like, I'm just trying to think of something. He knows I'm like a drama comedy writer. So, it's a little bit different.
One of the things that I've done when people have presented me with opportunities that I couldn't do, that I genuinely didn't feel like I was the right writer. And I would say, let me introduce you to one of my friends who writes in that genre, who is a great writer. I think you would enjoy. That still is part of the pay it forward, because you're helping your friend, you're helping your other friend, and they're making a new relationship. And then they feel warm and fuzzy about you because you weren't selfish trying to do something that would have been a mediocre product.
Yeah.
Instead, you're pointing them a direction of somebody who could have maybe done it better.
But I think it's important when you do something like that, specifically for writers, right? The material already exists. Because it's important that this connection that you have, that you've built over time, you want to make sure that if you're giving them something from someone else, that it's something of quality.
Yes.
Right. So I've done that before, not with this particular opportunity, but I always make sure that whenever I send something, I make sure I read it first. And that, okay, this works. This fits what they're looking for or whatever. So, yeah.
Don't send people shit.
No brainer.
Reckless tip of the day. I'm so excited for you. I think this is really exciting. So have you gotten any feedback yet about, from your students? Did you give them copies of the book? Is it required reading for your class?
Well, funny you mentioned that. It's actually going to be used in college classes in 3 different colleges this fall.
Sweet.
That's awesome. Congrats.
Thank you. One in Tennessee, one in Pennsylvania, and then the University of Georgia. So what we're going to do, I have the crowdfunding class that I've taught at my other universities. We're going to be teaching, I'll be teaching that class and then using my book as the text for the first time. And
you should also get those universities to use Scott Meyer's book too.
That's a bit of a challenge because we have Neil Landau on our faculty.
Okay.
And he's got 2 books, so we kind of have.
Yeah. Yeah.
All
Shake it
three,
up a little.
all three of you. It's just like a filmmaker starter pack. That's like a must need. I'd read that. I read all of those books.
That
Uh,
sounds like a writer's store package deal.
it would have been. It would have been once
It would have
upon a
been.
time. So I'm curious, Marty, everything that you've done and are now doing, juggling personal life stuff, the college, all of it, getting ready to get this book out into the world. How do you find your own creative time to do what you want to do as a writer or, planning for the next thing that you want to shoot, in Georgia, especially?
Well, right now I don't. The reason for that is we're in the middle of moving. So I've had a little bit of time to focus on cardboard boxes.
Oh, that's the worst.
Um, but in the past, and specifically since I started teaching full time, the positions that I've had actually have creative work built into the job description, right?
Mm.
So if you get a tenure track teaching position somewhere, most of the time they have kind of a setup where there's three major things you have to do. So teaching is one of those things, and they usually go with a percentage of around 30 to 40%. They have what's called service, and that's, you work on committees, you volunteer on recruiting day, things like that. That's usually about 20% of the job. And then the remaining 40% is actually creative work. And you're judged on that. And that's actually what they use as criteria to see if you get tenure and promotion at that particular university. So that the last two jobs I've had, they were tenure track positions, and they've allowed me to actually have time as part of my job to do that. So that was really exciting. This position I'm in actually doesn't do that, but I'm hoping I'll be able to find a position like that at the university where I can and then still run the film program. I just want to get my foot in the door. That's really been the benefit of those jobs. Before that, it's just getting up earlier. It's going to bed later. It's not going out on Friday night when your friends are going out. It's buying the book at the bookstore that can give you tips on a particular thing instead of, going out on a date, things like that. I mean, that's quite literally what it is. And you sacrifice what you feel you should, to get the time that you need to make the stuff that you want.
But a lot harder now that you have a family. I think that's what a lot of people really struggle with too, is figuring out how to still have that quality family time. I think a lot of my friends with little kids would be like, get up really early. I couldn't stay up late. I would always fall asleep. I,
I've actually always been the opposite. I can't get up in the morning, but I can
yeah.
stay. It's interesting now that I've got a family, because I still want to be creative, and my wife and I, we talk about this all the time because my wife's an actress, and we want to be creative with our son,
Hmm.
and and we want to tell stories with him, hopefully to inspire him to want to tell his own. So like we've talked about different short film ideas where, even before he was 1 year old, thinking of like, she could play a therapist, talking with a baby, in an office or something like that. So we're always trying to think of stuff like that where we can incorporate that into, the life that we have as a family.
You're going to doom him to be an artist.
Don't forget, I'm 6'7" tall, so he potentially could be a basketball player too. So
Okay, good. Backup plan. I like that.
don't tell his grandfather, because his grandfather thinks he's going to be a pitcher on a pro baseball team.
Okay, so we just don't share this link. So he,
Yeah.
block the grandfather. But I do think that people, and I was always going to write an article about this for Pipeline Artists. So I guess since I'm saying it out loud, I have to. I run a cemetery on top of everything else, but it makes you think about. I don't get paid for that, so don't everybody think I'm. There's no money in running cemeteries, so run from that too. Yeah, but it makes you think about life, obviously, and the things as I walk through the cemetery. I think about the people there and the things that they worried about, the things they cried about, the things they fretted about, the things they, went into debt for to get. And at the end of it, you make yourself so stressed and so worried about stuff. No one even remembers who you are at like a certain number of years after you're gone. So maybe instead of worrying and fretting and all of that, just do it. Just do it. Just have fun, have a good time. Don't worry about people are going to think of you if you're an artist, or if you're, oh God, that person, oh, they've been telling me that they're a quote unquote writer for 10 years. And what have they done? Like, I haven't seen any films of theirs, you know? You know what? I'm just going to say it. They can all fuck off, because it doesn't matter. It's not just what you produced and what you've come out with and what is the finished product. It's everything that's happened along the way, all the friends you've made, all the fun times you've had. Like, those are the things that really matter, no matter what your profession is, whether you're an artist or a banker. And I wish that more people would have more grace with themselves, and also have more grace with other people who are creating. And instead of just like, if they don't like something they did and they attack them for it, well, guess what? They got it done.
Yeah.
And there's so many people involved in making a film. It's not necessarily their fault if it didn't turn out the way you wanted it to.
Right. But it exists. Yeah.
That's,
And that's the biggest thing.
yeah.
The whole idea of creating, especially in a world like the one that we're in, where the economy is not in the best shape, right? And everybody's having some kind of struggle somewhere, whether it's financial or COVID residue or whatever it is. I feel like creating is something that can be a community act. And it was funny. Dan Mervish was one of the interviewers.
Oh my God, I love Dan.
He's the best. And
sorry, did I say that too loud?
Not loud enough.
He said something really interesting. He says that films that he makes are actually considered long form community art projects.
Yes.
And when he said that, that just like crystallized everything. Like, it not just in terms of, being financially self-sustaining, but also as a method to, have a community that you get involved in with things. I'm not the most religious person in the world. But I know a lot of folks, my wife's family included, they're involved in their church, and that's where they find community. For me, this is where I find community, is in the creation of things and the mentorship of other creators and stuff like that. So it's a different method, of finding it, but when it comes down to it, it accomplishes kind of the same goal.
We actually have a 2-part huge mammoth interview of Dan on Pipeline Artists. It's so good. And we had him on Reckless Creatives too.
Yeah.
He makes the rounds.
I'm sure he talked and told lots of stories.
Oh my God, he's so good.
Yeah.
And I believe we have a scones recipe.
Oh.
Yes.
Well, that is what, with a little bit of cardamom, if I remember correctly.
Yeah. I think that's what it was. That was the tea. But the idea of, or it's not an idea, it is a thing, like, community and building your film tribe around that, and just getting that engagement of people connecting to you and your story also, because you're also trying to like sell yourself to them, of like taking this chance on this crazy ride that you're like, let's go make a movie about zombies or whatever. And they're like, okay, like why? But it's so cool. I haven't really had that opportunity to like making a movie with a community and like celebrating it, at a local theater, and like, look at what we did. Like, but I feel like, I'm sure the people who have done that, it's just such a rewarding experience, and probably, in some way more rewarding than collecting that first check, even though you want that first check, to pay it all off. But I mean, if you can do it, do it. It's just, yeah.
When we had our Connecticut premiere of Rising Star, and I talk a little bit about this in the book, we had a state premiere at one of the locations that we filmed in, because it was the Connecticut Science Center, and they actually had a 200-seat IMAX theater where they showed like nature documentaries and stuff like that. So we set it up so that we could actually play the film, and we had 2 sold-out screenings of that movie. Wow. We had 400 people show up, and they were all people I knew, people I went to school with, family members, some who I hadn't seen in a long time. And that, and of course we had an after party, after that at a local restaurant, which was also another location in the film. And that really was like a great community moment. Everybody was able to come out, and I was a catalyst along with all the other people that worked on the film. But it was really a cool thing. It was a story about the people who came, right? Because it's a Connecticut story and it was Connecticut people that were there and they had a real close tie to it. And we did a couple months after that, we actually partnered with the city of Hartford, and we were one of the films that they played in public parks over the summer that year. So they had this huge blow up screen and they played it. And I think we got about 500 people that came to see that film.
Wow.
And I'll never forget, it was so funny. I was just sort of walking around. I didn't do any intro or anything. Everybody was just like, this is like the local film that's going to play. And I was kind of walking around and talking with friends and stuff. And I heard these two people going, so you think this is going to make it to theaters all around the country? And the other person's like, yeah, I heard the filmmaker's a really good filmmaker. We should be able to get something so that the whole country can see Connecticut. And it just, it made me laugh, but at the same time, like, it builds excitement. And anytime you have something like that, I think that's valuable. And I think, a community can rally around it.
Lovely. I'm very, very happy for you, Marty. I think this book is a long time in coming, something that is needed because some books out there aren't needed. But this one is needed because I also think that given what's going on in the industry and after the strike, I personally think there's going to be a rise of indie films. That's what I'm hoping. And I feel like your timing is perfect because there's going to be a bunch of people maybe who are been writers and now they want to try to be a director or producer. And they'll be like, I don't know where to begin. Mm-hmm. And they'll grab this book and they'll say, I can do this. And so I think the timing is really good.
That means the world. Thank you. Yeah, it's funny. It took me about 3 years to write it. So the fact that the timing is perfect is kind of funny because of how slow of a writer I am. But yeah, I've heard similar things from other folks. I ran into Emily Best from Seed and Spark a couple weeks ago here in Georgia, and she said the same thing. She's another interviewee in the book, and she said, the timing is perfect for this. I hope it is. I hope that people who want to take this step can read this and realize that it's possible, that it's not going to be easy. That was one thing I wanted to make sure was that I didn't sugarcoat anything, but that, if you put the work in, it's possible. You can do it.
You know what else? If you put the work in, it's possible you can do it.
What?
Raise a 1-year-old.
Thank you.
It's not going to be easy, but you put the work in. Not sure which is harder, parenting a human or parenting a film.
Well, so far my films have taken longer than the life of my child. So I don't know if I could totally give it.
It's early.
But when you have a wife like mine, it becomes much easier because she is a rock star and does so much to take care of him and to teach him and all that. I am very lucky to have my wife, Mary Beth.
And waiting 45 years was worth it. Just saying.
Talk to me if I still think that way when I'm 66 and I have a 20-year-old. We'll see how that works out.
We will. We'll come back in 20 years. We will pick up from the conversation.
Because we won't be retired yet. Because all comes full circle.
That's right.
Reckless Creatives is a Pipeline Artist original podcast. Like, subscribe, and follow us on social media at Pipeline Artists. And find more info at pipelineartists.com/listen. Until next time, stay reckless.